It's a really startling thought when you hear it. Some research actually suggests chronic loneliness can be as bad for your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
15.
Wow. 15. It really does make you stop and think, doesn't it? And that kind of leads us to the big puzzle we're grappling with today.
Right.
Well, we're swimming in all this technology, right? Stuff designed specifically to connect us. So why do so many people still feel so, profoundly alone?
It's a huge paradox. Yeah. And it really gets to the core of, what it's like living today. We build these amazing tools, but they don't always deliver that genuine connection we crave.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the two main threads we're trying to untangle in this deep dive.
Yeah.
We're looking at this crisis of social isolation.
Okay.
And sort of alongside it, this other thing, the rise and maybe even the fall of our disposable culture.
Disposable culture. Okay, interesting link.
Yeah, and the sources we looked at, they hint these two things might be way more connected than you'd first think. Maybe even sparked by something as simple as every day, as like a cheap lighter.
A cheap lighter, right. That's intriguing. So yeah, our exploration today is pulling from a couple of places. We've got bits from a documentary script called The Loneliness Epidemic. Are we more disconnected than ever?
Right, the social, psychological angle.
Exactly. And then we've paired that with this fictional narrative, The Fractured Fabric, how the Bic moment changed everything, plus some other bits for context.
Yeah.
And that gives us a lens to look at the sort of broader impact of that throwaway mindset.
So the goal today is really to dig in, understand the roots, the consequences of both the loneliness and this disposable culture. And hopefully give you, our listener, a clearer picture of these huge shifts happening, and maybe, just maybe, see some paths forward. Ready to jump in.
Definitely. I think looking at them together, side by side, helps us get a much better grasp of the challenges and, where change might happen.
Okay, let's take that first piece then. Feeling disconnected, even when we're supposedly hyper-connected. That documentary script of The Loneliness Epidemic, it really goes there, right?
Yeah.
How the tech meant to help might actually be, backfiring. Let's start with texting. You called it the texting trap. What's the main problem?
Well, just think about how much gets lost, right? When you boil communication down to just words on a screen,
Yeah.
the script talks about research showing how vital things like, the tone of your voice, your facial expression, even just body language,
Yeah.
how much that adds to understanding.
Totally.
Texting basically strips all that away.
Right. Like, how many times has a text been completely misunderstood because you couldn't hear the sarcasm or whatever?
Exactly.
And someone texts LOL, but they've got a totally blank face. It's such a lean way to talk.
It really is. And the documentary suggests this can kind of flatten our interactions, make them shallower.
Yeah.
Arguments can blow up easier because all that nuance that might smooth things over face to face, it's just gone. It's efficient, maybe.
Maybe.
But it's definitely less emotionally rich.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
We're connected, technically, but maybe not really getting each other. Okay, so the documentary then pivots to social media. The social media illusion, you called it. What's the illusion there?
The illusion, as the documentary puts it, is basically mistaking all that online noise, likes, follows, comments, for real, genuine connection.
Ah, okay. So it feels like connection, but it's not quite the same thing.
Precisely. It creates this sort of false sense of popularity or belonging.
Like we're putting on a show for an audience, and the applause is just notifications pinging.
That's a great way to put it. And the script really highlights that performance aspect, this pressure to curate the perfect online life.
Yeah, the highlight reel.
Exactly. And that curated perfection often clashes, sometimes painfully, with our actual messy everyday lives. The documentary mentions studies suggesting that constantly doing this performing, comparing yourself to others' best bits, can actually make you feel more isolated and inadequate.
Wow. So you're seeing everyone else's curated vacation pics and perfect family moments, and suddenly your normal Tuesday feels lacking. Yeah, I can see how that would breed disconnection, even when you're technically connected 24/7.
Definitely. And while, social media can help people connect, find communities, the documentary really stresses that the kind of connection you often get, it lacks the depth, the give and take of real-world relationships.
So you might get attention.
Yeah, loads of attention maybe, but not necessarily true belonging, not that feeling of being truly seen and accepted.
It's like junk food for social connection. Fills the space, but doesn't really nourish you. Okay, so texting limitations, social media illusions, we're seeing a pattern. And then there's remote work, which the documentary also brought up. How does that fit?
Well, the script points out that while remote work has huge upsides, flexibility being a big one,
Sure.
it also cuts down massively on those spontaneous, informal chats that used to just happen in the office. You know, the water cooler moments, bumping into someone in the hall, grabbing a quick coffee.
Yeah, those little throwaway interactions that actually aren't throwaway at all.
Exactly. They seem small, but they build camaraderie, trust, that feeling of being part of something. There where casual ideas get shared, maybe a bit of support when someone's having a rough day.
Mm-hmm.
When almost all your interaction is scheduled, Zoom calls or emails like the doc notes, that organic, easy connection can just fade. And people can end up feeling pretty isolated, even if they're talking to colleagues all day.
It really paints a picture of our social world just shrinking down to the size of our laptop screen.
Mm.
Okay, so we see how tech is reshaping things, maybe leading to isolation. Let's talk consequences.
The documentary really hammered the mental health angle.
Yeah, it draws a really stark line between chronic loneliness and mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
It talks about research showing clear links to higher rates of anxiety, depression, and maybe the most worrying part, it highlights studies connecting long-term isolation to higher mortality rates, actually comparable to things like smoking or obesity. Higher mortality, wow. That really shifts the perspective, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just feeling sad, it's a genuine health risk.
It absolutely is. The documentary really stresses this isn't just, feeling a bit blue. It has real physical effects. And the sneaky thing, as the script points out, is how it can creep up on you as those social ties just gradually weaken.
And it also mentioned a rise in social anxiety, which,
Wow.
makes total sense, right? If you spend less time talking face-to-face,
Yeah.
actually doing it can feel pretty awkward, even scary.
Well, the documentary frames social interaction as a skill, something you need to practice.
Like playing an instrument.
Kind of, yeah. When most of your communication is digital, you just get fewer chances to practice reading body language, picking up on subtle cues, managing that in-person back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And that lack of practice, the doc suggests, can lead to feeling more nervous, more self-conscious in social settings, which can then make you want to retreat back online.
Creating a vicious cycle,
Exactly, exacerbating the whole problem.
like losing your social muscles.
Yeah.
And then there was this idea of fading emotional intelligence. That was interesting.
Yeah, the documentary really zeroed in on how much nonverbal stuff matters for emotional intelligence. Being able to read people, understand their feelings. So much of that comes from facial expressions, body language, tone of voice.
All the stuff texting strips out.
Pretty much all of it, yeah. So the doc suggests that relying too heavily on digital chat can actually stunt our ability to develop and use empathy. To really connect emotionally, conversations become more about just swapping info.
Transactional.
Yeah, transactional. Less about that subtle dance of understanding feelings.
So we're losing the ability to read between the lines, basically.
Yeah.
To get those unspoken messages that make interactions human.
Mm-hmm.
It's concerning. And then the documentary looked ahead at AI. This idea of AI filling the void of loneliness sounds a bit sci-fi.
Well, it's becoming less sci-fi, actually. The documentary explores the rise of AI chatbots, virtual friends, AI companions. These things are being developed, and some people are starting to use them, maybe as a stand-in for human contact. If you're really lonely, maybe talking to an AI offers some kind of interaction, makes you feel less alone.
A digital crutch, maybe?
Could be. But the really crucial point the documentary makes is this. AI can mimic conversation, maybe even sound comforting, but it doesn't have real consciousness. It doesn't have empathy. It can't form a genuine reciprocal relationship.
Right. It's code. It's a simulation, not the real deal.
Exactly. The documentary is pretty clear. AI can't offer that nuanced understanding, that real emotional support, that authentic connection you only get from other humans. So while it might offer a temporary Band-Aid, there's a real danger of mistaking that artificial interaction for something real, which could, ironically, just make the underlying isolation even deeper.
Fascinating. And yeah, a bit unsettling, thinking about how we might truly patch that deep human need for connection down the line.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's one massive piece of this deep dive, the loneliness, the tech connection or disconnection. Let's pivot now to the second big theme.
Okay.
This idea of the rise and maybe fall of disposable culture.
Mm-hmm.
And this phrase you use from the source, the Bic moment. What exactly does that mean?
So that narrative, the fractured fabric, it uses the simple Bic Lighter, cheap, disposable as this really potent symbol, a symbol for a huge cultural shift that really picked up steam in the early 2000s.
Okay.
This shift towards prioritizing convenience, disposability, and not just with stuff we buy, but maybe bleeding into our attitudes about relationships, values, everything.
A cheap lighter marking a cultural turning point.
Right.
It's a vivid image.
Think about what a Bic Lighter is, right? It's cheap. It's everywhere. You use it, it runs out, you toss it, no big deal.
Right.
The narrative argues that this use and toss mentality started spreading. It seeped into the culture, making transience seem normal, maybe even desirable. Less focus on things that last, on repairing things, on durability.
So this disposability thing wasn't just about plastic forks. It started affecting how we thought about other things too.
That's the argument, yeah. The narrative talks about the split emerging in society. You had the dispo elite who were all in on this disposable culture, always chasing the new thing, valuing instant gratification.
Okay.
And then you had the endure class, people still focused on repair, reuse, on things having lasting quality. And the split wasn't just economic. The story suggests it was psychological, emotional, maybe even spiritual.
Wow, a real fundamental difference in worldview. And I can definitely see how social media blowing up around the same time would just pour fuel on that disposable fire, right? Always showing you the next new shiny thing.
Oh, absolutely. The narrative points to social media as a huge accelerator.
Yeah.
It fed that constant craving for novelty, created those echo chambers reinforcing consumerism. And you saw this fragmentation of shared values replaced by polarized bubbles and fleeting online trends. It kind of echoes the fragmented connections we were just talking about with the loneliness epidemic.
Yeah, it does. And all this consuming and tossing. The environmental impact must have been massive.
The narrative is pretty blunt about that. It describes overflowing landfills, oceans choked with plastic, just the sheer unsustainability of it all.
A heavy price for convenience. So, okay, we have this disposable culture taking hold, shaping values, hurting the planet. But the story also talks about a turning point. Around 2023, what happened?
According to the narrative, it was a mix of things, but a big one was global supply chains getting really strained, really fragile. That fragility, plus maybe growing environmental awareness, led governments to make a big move, slapping heavy tariffs on disposable goods, trying to rein in consumption, push towards sustainability.
Tariffs on everyday stuff, like plastic wrap and paper plates. That would definitely grab people's attention.
Oh, yeah. The narrative describes an immediate shock. Prices shot up for all those things people had just assumed would always be cheap and easy to get.
Wow.
It forced this kind of collective pause, making people really reconsider the actual cost of all that disposability.
So the wallet talked, basically. Economic reality forced a change.
That's a big part of it, yeah. The narrative shows dispo marts starting to struggle as their cheap goods weren't so cheap anymore. And at the same time, you saw this revival of old skills.
Like what?
Like fixing things suddenly made economic sense again. YouTube tutorials on sewing, mending clothes, basic repairs, they apparently blew up in popularity. Local repair shops, the ones that had been dying out, they started making a comeback.
A return to resourcefulness, driven by necessity.
Pretty much. The throwaway lifestyle just stopped being affordable for a lot of people. And then the narrative brings in this idea of a new generation, kids who grew up seeing the downsides of disposability. And they started actively valuing things differently. Durability, sustainability, being resourceful, those became cool again, maybe.
A generational shift, a conscious rejection of the use and toss life. And the narrative looks even further ahead, right? Past 2042. What's that future look like?
It paints a picture of like revitalized local economies, more businesses focused on repair, craftsmanship, reusing materials. Community bonds get stronger because people are sharing skills, helping each other out. Landfill growth slows way down. The waste problem isn't gone, but the culture has shifted. People value things that last. Quality over quantity.
Interesting.
This constant chase for the newest thing fades, and there's more appreciation for just having enough. That idea gains ground.
So the big moment ends up being this kind of cautionary tale then.
Yeah.
About where prioritizing cheap convenience can lead.
Exactly.
And maybe a catalyst for rediscovering value, care, durability, connection to the physical world.
Precisely. It really highlights how focusing only on short-term ease can have these huge, unintended long-term consequences for the planet, but also for our values as a society.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating, isn't it, how these two big topics, loneliness and disposability, seem so different at first, but they actually mirror each other in some ways. How do you see them connecting?
Well, at their heart, both stories are really critiquing the same basic trend, aren't they? Prioritizing the superficial, the easy, the immediate over things that are deeper, more meaningful, more lasting.
Yeah.
The loneliness epidemic shows the cost in our relationships, isolation, losing social skills because we opt for shallow digital chat. The big moment shows the cost in our world, environmental damage, devaluing craft, losing touch with the physical stuff around us because we just want to toss it and get the next thing.
So both are kind of warnings about trading depth for ease,
Yeah,
whether it's in how we talk to each other or how we treat our belongings and our planet.
that sums it up really well, yeah. Both sources are basically saying, hey, be careful about prioritizing fleeting convenience and surface-level connection. The long-term fallout can be pretty bad for us as individuals and for society as a whole.
It definitely gives us a lot to chew on. So we kick this off asking why we feel so alone when we're supposedly more connected than ever. After digging into all this, what's your takeaway on that big question? Are we actually more disconnected?
This deep dive really suggests that, yeah, while we might be more networked digitally, we might be facing a deeper kind of disconnection from real, meaningful human interaction, and maybe disconnection from the tangible world, too. That focus on convenience, on disposability, pushed by tech, by consumer culture, it might have accidentally weakened the very things that create real connection and lasting value.
That's a really powerful thought to end on. And it sparks one last question for our listeners to think about, something maybe not explicit in the sources, but seems to follow.
Go on.
If this shift away from disposable goods, driven by economic necessity, as the narrative suggests, could that shift also, maybe unintentionally, open up more doors for actual real-world interaction?
How do you mean?
Well, think about it. People learning repair skills, maybe sharing those skills in workshops, shopping locally, supporting craftspeople, building community networks around fixing things, reusing things. Could tackling disposability actually end up bringing people together more face-to-face?
That's a really interesting point, like a positive side effect almost.
Okay.
Fixing the disposability problem might inadvertently help fix some of the connection problem too, creating opportunities for real community building.
Exactly. It's just some food for thought.
Yeah.
So as you go about your day, maybe notice that interplay.
Right.
Where does convenience win out over connection for you? Where does disposability edge out durability? Definitely something to ponder.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.